Ooh. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Three Things presented by the Tyee. My name is Emma Cooper, and I'm here with our publisher, Jeanette Ageson, and she's going to talk about trends in the media and what she's hopeful for in the media generally. And yeah, are you excited, Jeanette?
Super excited.
Super pumped.
Yeah.
It's not the topic people are thinking that was maybe going to come up with some current trends, and you'll talk about that. I'll just acknowledge before we get going that we are on the unceded territory of the Musqueam, the Tsleil-Waututh, and the Squamish First Nations. And if anyone wants to chime in the chat on Facebook, on YouTube, or on here on Zoom, and let us know where you're calling in from, or calling in. This is not radio. Just let us know where you're watching from, and we'll give you a shout out. And yeah, really, really excited. Please ask any questions that you have. We're just going to have a very broad conversation about media and pick your brain, Jeanette. So,
all right.
Yeah, and I like to embarrass our incredibly humble team before we get going, and so that's my job. You have been with the Tyee for 6 years. Again, the Tyee was founded in 2003, and it sounds like, because I've only been around for a year and a half, it sounds like this is such a great base of like interesting and innovative thinking in the Tyee, but lots of hard times as well in terms of like keeping the whole thing going. And you've been really instrumental in trying to maneuver through some challenging landscape. And so I think some people might have the question, like, what kind of background do you need to be a publisher? And like, what does a publisher even do? Maybe before we even start.
Sure. Yeah, publisher is kind of an interesting title to have because it can mean completely different things depending on what kind of organization you are in. So it really has a lot to do with the business model of the publication and how it makes money and how much it needs to keep making money. So for us, yeah, we've always had to be quite inventive for how we've brought in revenue. So the business side of the Tyees is in the past mostly been about fundraising. And fundraising and earning revenue from advertising or from doing live events or doing special projects that you get a funder for, and increasingly getting revenue directly from readers. But in different publications, maybe like in a different publication that doesn't have a reader revenue model, they are sort of the head of advertising sales, and also if they have like a print product, they're sort of the head of distribution. So my job as publisher at the Tyee probably looks completely different than the role of publisher at sort of, let's say, like a print newspaper that's mostly supported by advertising. In terms of what a publisher does, I think basically I see the role as
a mysterious question.
Yeah, well, it's not an obvious answer. I don't think many people would necessarily be able to answer that. It's basically I see it as taking care of the organization and providing it with all the resources it needs for everyone here to do their job. So sometimes what the organization needs is clear policies for staff to follow. So spend some time doing that. A lot of time what the organization needs to do its job is money. So I'm spending a lot of time doing fundraising or selling ads and stuff like that. Sometimes we need a clear idea of what we're doing and where we're going. So in that case, I would be working on a strategic plan or something like that. Sometimes we need new teammates. So then I'm working on recruiting and hiring. So you were asking earlier about like what things you need to do the job. I think liking learning new things, because I'm constantly, it's such a multifaceted job that I'm constantly coming up against a challenge that I actually have no idea how to do. And sometimes I'm coming up against a challenge that there is no playbook for, like it's not something that I can just look up or talk to someone. Like sometimes it's quite a unique problem or a new problem. So I think it's a really good role for people who like to have interesting problems to work on.
Yeah. Well, and that was definitely something that was surprising to me when I came to the Tyee. And again, you're the publisher. I'm your backup. We're the two-person business side of the team. And sort of looking and being like, oh yeah, I'm sure there's just something else that's written down that we can copy, right? And you're kind of like, maybe not. And it was like, it's like educate them, make them ups, which is very exciting.
Yeah.
So that's been really, really interesting for me to see how you manage that. And again, it's like you're talking about a lot of high level thinking, and then right into like a lot of details and making sure everything happens. So, so that's kind of the vibe of what you do every day to make sure the Tyee can keep producing great stories and great journalism. How do you talk a little bit maybe about the business model? Because I think that you know, in other times there was a different format to raise money and to keep journalism going than what the Tyee is doing now. So do you want to talk a little bit about maybe kind of the evolution of the Tyee and where we're at and how we got here?
Yeah, and maybe before I talk about the evolution of the Tyee, I'll talk about like the industry as a whole, meaning like the news journalism industry. I didn't really have much reason to think about it, honestly, before I started working for the Tyee. So I imagine not many other people who read the Tyee spend a lot of time thinking about the business model behind news and journalism and how it's evolved. But I have found it super fascinating. So there's this. I've read quite a bit about the history of newspapers in Canada and the US. And there's this idea that there was this golden age for newspapers between the years, like between the 1940s and the 1980s. And that's, I think, where we get a lot of our rosy ideas about public interest journalism and investigative journalism. Yeah. That's the era that all the movies are
like the Watergate scandal kind of journalism.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm sure journalists are looking at that team now saying they had how long to work on that story? Or they had what kind of resources at their disposal to work on that story. Right. So yeah, there was a reason why it's the golden age of journalism. Because the business model at that point was so well resourced, like I've seen it referred to as owning a newspaper, and back then was having a license to print money. If you think about it, they were the only game in town for anyone who wanted to place an ad, anyone who wanted to sell a used item or post a job or take out an obituary or something like that, or send coupons to possible customers. And on the reader side, if you wanted, your TV guide, or if you wanted those coupons or something like that, or if you wanted to find out about the sports or something like that, or figure out how to do something in your community, you would go to the newspaper. And so all of those things, the classifieds, the ads, those were all quite profitable. But since then, in the last few decades, all of those pieces have gotten kind of blown up and parted out. And other sort of disruptors in the industry have found other ways to provide those services in a way that people like better. So if you want to sell something or you want to buy or use something, you go to Craigslist. If you want to learn about sports, there's websites just for sports, and it doesn't come packaged up with anything else. If you want to read comics or any of that kind of creative stuff, like there's just an explosion of that kind of creativity online that does not need to be in a newspaper. And then the decoupling really has intensified in the last, I would say, maybe 15 years, once Google and Facebook figured out how to make advertising products that were so well targeted and so flexible for advertisers to use that it became less interesting for advertisers to take ads out in newspapers.
Right.
So
because with Facebook, you can target an ad for like hat wearing ferret owners in Coquitlam, and
yeah, exactly.
Then you can talk right to your people, and you can't do that as a newspaper.
Yeah, you can't offer that kind of targeting. So that's really hurt newspapers. It's taken away a lot of their advertising revenue. And I think people got used to paying a certain amount for their newspaper subscription. And so in people's minds, it would be normal to pay, I don't know, $10 to $20 a month or so for a newspaper. But that pretty much from what I understand from some reading that I've done, that only really covers like the printing and the shipping of the actual product.
Right.
Back in the golden era, advertising accounted for 80%, and this is broad. This is not every newspaper, but advertising accounted for 80+% of revenues,
Right.
and subscriptions, the remaining 20 or even less. So it kind of has set up expectations that people have about the quality of journalism that we want and that we need, and also the amount of money that people are willing to pay. So there's been a great, decades of destabilization in the business model for news, while at the same time, people have really realized that sort of in-depth independent journalism is pretty important. And it's not one of these businesses or services that we really can afford to lose. So that's the challenge. That's the challenge, is how to figure out how to reinvent that backbone of a news organization to still be able to produce the public interest journalism without the fabulous profits, or even just not even profits, just fabulous revenue of years past.
And that's a pretty substantial challenge. And we've seen, I think one of the articles you shared with me said that, in the 1990s, there was about twice as many people working in journalism in the States as there was in 2017. And even since 2017, we've heard about all these trends with unfortunate layoffs and switching hands of ownership and things like that. So given that context, the Tyee is swimming in that landscape. Can you tell a few pieces about what the Tyee has done? Because obviously when there's big shifts like that, we're all looking for a silver bullet solution, but often these changes are small and incremental. Can you talk about some of those incremental changes with the Tyee shifting away from something like an advertising or a different model?
Yeah. So the Tyee was founded in 2003, and I wasn't around at the time, but it had some seed capital from the majority investors, and then a minority investor came on in 2005, and so they had sort of a fixed amount of money that they could work with. And then my predecessor, Michelle, and other people working with her were incredibly inventive for the other ways that they made money. So they created an advertising base, but that was in the early 2000s. So I think it was already kind of difficult to sell advertising. And they did well, but especially since a few years ago, it's gotten harder and harder to sell advertising. Yep. And then they also just sort of by necessity started, like very early on, started doing reader fundraising. So sort of stepping out from behind the screen figuratively and saying straight to the readers, we love doing this. Yeah, we love doing this. You seem to like it. And the ambitions always outstrip the budget. So they were pretty early to the game of saying directly to readers, we want to do more of this. If you agree, if you want us to do more, then would you mind pitching in to help us do it?
Feels a little bit like a relationship. At a certain point, you've been dating for a while and you're like, are we really doing this?
Yeah.
Are we committing?
Can we use the words? Are
we changing Facebook status updates?
Yeah. Can we make this a thing? You come here every day. I'm here every day. Yeah, exactly.
But you kind of have to make that ask, right? Like at some point that is, kind of a formal ask, and you have to set that intention. So
yeah, it doesn't just happen. You have to make the ask. So early days, they set up these fellowship funds that readers could give to. Those funds were held outside of the Tyee, and then a panel of people that were not working for the Tyee. They would get applications for fellows, and they would, pick who the fellow was going to be, and they would get paid directly from that fund. The fellow would produce journalism, and it would get published on the Tyee. And then 2009, I think, they started their first experiments with just asking readers directly for money to directly fund the Tyee. And the first time they asked for $5,000 to do more BC election reporting, and they ended up making $25,000. So I think that was the first time when they thought, that this might be a thing. Yeah, and then there was a grad student who did his thesis on the Tyee about creating a reader support program. Again, it was very early days, 2011. I think I was kind of maybe Kickstarter and Patreon and all that kind of stuff were just starting, but not really in earnest. And he came back and said, no, you could really stabilize your revenues and be able to grow the organization if you do this. So that's when they created the Tyee Builders program. And then I came on in about 2014, and I've been working pretty steadily on growing the Tyee Builders program. And it's one of the only reasons why the Tyee is still around, and why we're able to do what we do, and why we are somewhat insulated from the shocks that happen in the industry. Like, for example, when COVID started, it's been a real shame because the demand for news, and especially the local news, has never been higher. But at the same time, a lot of publications just got their knees completely knocked out from under them because a lot of businesses canceled their advertising. And we've seen a lot of layoffs and some closures. But luckily, because we're mostly supported by readers and just a little bit by advertising, we were able to make it through.
Kind of catch your footing. And could you talk a little bit about the kind of, how do you think I mean, I know people who are watching are people who really care about journalism. Can you talk about, I mean, we're giving people kind of the look behind the curtain, at what is sort of behind some of the elements that allow for this journalism that people respond to. Can you talk a little bit about the advertising versus the membership model, and maybe how that impacts journalism that people read?
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, advertising is, since the golden era, that's been the primary way that people have paid for advertising, or paid for journalism. But of course, the way you make money incentivizes the kind of product that you make. So, I mean, journalists have been able to do fantastic work at outlets that are supported by advertising, but I don't think it necessarily incentivizes the sort of like deep, long-term coverage that people were able to do in the golden era. Like, if you think about, Watergate or Spotlight or something like that, that kind of work is extremely expensive. In those times, an investigative unit, they might be working on a story with multiple people for years at a time. And then it gets its moment in the paper, and they may have put, $300,000 behind that story, and they place it next to an ad that's only going to be getting them, on the day that it's published, maybe it's getting them a few $100s. Right. So you can see that the incentive is not quite there unless you're just like swimming in cash. The incentive isn't there to spend a lot of money on your stories. So sometimes what you can get, and what we have seen with certain sites, is they want to get bulk views. So they're more incentivized to write things that are already in popular culture. They're looking for stuff that will get a huge audience, so less likely to write on super local stories or stories that take a lot of time to put together. So they might just look at what else is in the news and sort of match a story that only takes a little while, like doesn't take that long to put together. And then it also creates this weird double delivery that you have to do, where if you are advertising supported, not only do you want to be a great destination for your readers, and everyone who gets into journalism, they want to create good journalism, so that's what people want to be doing, but then also you're trying to be the best platform for advertisers. And you can kind of experience this when you're on a site that has a ton of ads, where it's like you have to like fight to be able to see the text. Yes.
Trying to learn a new thing.
Yeah. And it's such a weird experience because you really want to read the thing, and you can tell that someone has put a lot of effort into it. But at the same time, it seems like their site is just doing its damnedest to try to get you to click away.
Right.
So I don't think it doesn't necessarily showcase the work in such a way. But in order for the news organization to even pay those people, they need people to click on the ads. They need people to read the ads. And the incentive is to try to stuff as many ads in there as possible without totally degrading the reading experience.
Right.
So it kind of creates a bit of a mixed incentive that is not always great. And then something else that can happen with that, purely going for the advertising model, is even if you're not going for bulk views, I think the incentive is to, if you're going for a niche audience, the incentive is to go for an audience that has high disposable income, so that you can then go to advertisers who are willing to spend a lot of money because they know that they'll make a lot of money from the readers. And then I think what happens then is it incentivizes the news, the magazine or the news publication to create content for people of high net worth. And that's not necessarily representative of everyone in the society and everyone that deserves reporting. So yeah, so advertising, it's been the backbone of news so far. But one of the things that I am hopeful for the news organization is that other ways of paying for news are starting to catch on, and specifically reader pay, like membership models or subscription. And I especially I'm a little biased, but I especially like the model that we do, which is where you just need a small number, a small percentage of your regular readers, 1 to 2%. If you can get 1 to 2% of your readers to pitch in, the articles are free for everybody.
Right.
And we're not just looking for people with high net worth. We're looking for people to support us because they see the impact of our reporting and see that it's worth supporting. So then we get to be sort of laser focused on just doing the best work that we can.
So you're saying that if 1% of people who read the Tyee give, they can be like the cool 1% and not like the 1% that people have been complaining about a little bit in the past couple of years?
Yeah. Yeah.
Nice. It's a different 1%. We're into that. So you're hopeful, like we're seeing this sort of the funding model is changing along with the landscape of news is changing. I'm hearing you're hopeful that that is going to produce different kind of stories that maybe have a wider appeal. Maybe people whose voices are not going to be heard are going to have more opportunity. What other things are giving you hope in general for news and kind of going forward in the shifting landscape?
Yeah, well, yeah, things that give me hope for news. I obsess about the revenue models and stuff. So when I say the things that I have hope for news, I'm mostly talking about like the business side of it. There's lots of stuff on the editorial side, but it's not really my wheelhouse. So yeah, the things that I'm excited for the news business. One, advertising is kind of losing prominence, which will suck in the short term. And we've seen, people being laid off, but other models are surging, like membership. What else I'm hopeful for is that I think more and more people are comfortable and sold on the idea that you should and can easily pay for news online. Like I think there was this sort of prevailing attitude, especially in like the early 2000s, that the internet was like a free content machine. Everyone was downloading music, everyone was torrenting movies.
Napster, LimeWire. What a time. What a time to be alive.
Exactly. And so if you paid for stuff online, it was like you were a chump. And even if you wanted to pay for stuff online, the process for paying was like the infrastructure wasn't there to make it as smooth and easy and secure as it is now. So I think we've gotten to a point where, there's been a lot of education. Like we've been sort of talking about it for years with our readers, like letting people understand how we make it, how we make the articles happen, and how we need people's support. But other organizations have really taken that up too and have been doing a lot of education. Like New York Times, for example, I think they may be making more money off of digital subscriptions than they are on advertising now.
That's wild.
Yeah, and the Guardian has been going really hard at it as well. Like, it's pretty aggressive when you go to their site, their ask, but it's really been working for them. And I think maybe just in the past couple of years, they went from having like running a deficit every year to actually bringing in more than they're spending, which I don't think was the case for them for many years.
Right.
Yeah, so I am hopeful that paying for things online, paying for digital products is like a normal thing now. Mm-hmm.
Like it. You do good work and you hope that folks come. And so I'm hearing the hopeful examples and the leadership in like Guardian and the New York Times, shifting in attitudes and ease of actually supporting media. And you're not dismissing any of the hard stuff that's happening in the media landscape right now too. Anything else to add? Because we've got a couple questions just before we wrap up.
Oh, sure. Yeah, I guess it was supposed to be 3 things. So the third thing that I'm excited about is that there's just a lot more experimentation going on in the last few years than before. And it feels like there's kind of a community of practice evolving of people who are just trying stuff and are willing to talk about it because it's hard. So, and you're, like I said before, you're constantly coming up with new problems to face. So it's very helpful to be able to talk about that with other people. So yeah, I'm regularly in conversation with other sort of independent media producers, and we're pretty open and helpful with each other as we sort of work through these new problems.
Right. So community of practice around people all admitting that no one really knows what's happening, which is kind of a humbling, uniting energy when you think about it.
Absolutely.
I like that. We have one question, and it's from Sheila Cooper. No relation. No, she's my mom. And she just was asking, Jeanette, given the golden age, what do you think society has gained or lost from the past? Is the reader now satisfied with a much less in-depth media? Do you find articles need to be short sound bites? I think you alluded to some of the articles needing to be sort of short and have a wide audience, but I guess kind of comparing the golden age to now, what have we lost or gained anything in terms of how we approach the news?
I think now all news organizations have a much better sense of how people are using their articles and how people are reading, because you have online analytics, which you didn't get before. So I think in the golden age, it was much more based on sort of editors' sort of gut feelings and probably their worldview of what they think that people should know. But now you have much closer feedback from readers just by looking at what it is that people like to read. And so you can use that to inform what you should do rather than just going on your gut. And I think also something that you've gained, particularly with the newspaper or the news organizations that get money from their readers, is you can't get away with totally ignoring your readers or thinking that you're better. It's a much more close relationship where we do want to hear from our readers. We do care what they think. We don't think that we know everything, and we know that our work is better when we sort of are informed by the people who are on the other side of the screen. And we're incentivized to do that. Like, I think it's a good thing to do anyways for anyone and any kind of business model, but we really are incentivized to be very in touch with what our readers are curious about. I think that's something that's got better. Something that we've lost, I think, just the massive budgets. Like
as spoken like a true publisher.
Yeah. I think we've probably lost the ability to, set up entire investigative units that can work on something for years without necessarily publishing anything. And that's where you get the most sort of explosive stories, or the most transformative stories, where you can really dig in and reveal stuff that people don't want you to know.
Right.
So I think that's something that we've lost. Although, we haven't lost investigative reporting. Lots of people, there's still a lot of it going down, but I don't know if it's quite the same.
Right. and having those sort of that long-term view is a huge asset. I guess the other side of it is we have now with social media, we have eyes and cameras everywhere, and we're seeing that
That's
in
true.
in the current moment, how impressive that is in terms of citizens just kind of being journalists on the go as well. But thank you. I mean, that wraps up our interview. Now, I forgot to ask you about a show and tell item, but I think you maybe have like maybe one gray hair or something from keeping the Tyee going.
Several, probably. I did have a show and tell item. I wanted to show, because we were talking about, growing in media organization. I wanted to show this plant, and the thing to, I guess you would learn about me is I'm horrible at keeping plants alive. So I'm actually very proud of these 4 new leaves that came up. I'm very excited about it. And it lives on my windowsill, and when I take a break, I go and see how it's doing. And I get an unreasonable amount of joy when I see a little sprout. So I think it's the only plant that I've actually been able to make bigger and not just immediately kill.
Well, that's amazing. I mean, congratulations on the plant, and also good job on keeping the Tyee going and growing.
Oh yeah.
So, yeah, that's no problem. But really, we're all pulling
for the plants. The plants are a challenge.
That's awesome. Well, thank you so much. That's 3 things, and join us next week where we're going to have Amanda Follett-Hosgood talk about how to be an ally in these sort of times and things that folks with privilege can do in terms of learning and growing. So we're going to have an open conversation about that. This has been great, and we'll wave goodbye. Great. Take care. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. Bye.
Bye.